Why is it every time there's an effort to get to the root cause here? Who caused Hamas? Bibi Netanyahu. Who's killing these children? Who's keeping this occupation?
Who is endorsing what Hamas is doing? The American left. That's who.
That's insane, Rob.
Well, it's true. It is insane, but it's true.
That is so
I can
insane.
see their statements.
Okay.
Everyone knows it and everyone understands
The
it.
American left disappears and suddenly Israel is a multiracial, multi-religious, halcyon fantasy land where Jews and Palestinians are walking arm in arm down the Gaza Strip.
The American left is humiliating itself on this issue. It's so apparent to everyone.
You want that to be true so hard. But what the reality is that finally the veil where everyone feels appalled to say the simple words, Palestine is an apartheid state. Israel is oppressing an occupied people. 2.3 million people, half of which are children, are being systematically starved and denied medical attention and denied clean water and
violent resistance against innocent people is the correct response.
Incredible freedom to finally be able to say those things. And in response, because Israel understands the incredible power of shifting its greatest allies in the public opinion away from unquestioning support, it is going out of
Nothing is sending people more supportive of Israel than what the left is doing right now. More supportive of military action, which is what Hamas wants.
People are going out of their way to lie. And spread from the podium of the United States of America, the president is they're so threatened by people being able to just speak to the obvious horror that the Palestinians have been living under for years, that they're now willing to lie and fabricate stories about Israeli kids in cages and what seems to be, and we'll see if any more reporting vets this out, a lie about 40 beheaded. How low and craven and gross do you have to be to make up a lie?
How craven do you have to be to say they had it coming, which is what these people are saying.
You can keep putting words in people's mouth, but nobody believes that, Robbie.
Well, you can see it. I read the exact statement.
Tell your own tale.
The right to resist and fight for their own liberation. This weekend's events are no different.
Yes.
That is an endorsement under the banner of liberation, of the attacks that Hamas took this weekend.
Your quibble was with international law and the fact that you seem to think that people should be living in prison conditions for the rest of their lives without ever doing
I don't think violence against civilians will help to ameliorate the appalling conditions of the Palestinians. Nor do most of the Palestinians, I would presume.
Yeah, neither do I. And that's if you refuse to acknowledge...
Hamas thinks that and the DSA thinks that.
If you refuse to acknowledge the difference between resistance and attacks on civilians, that's interesting.
I'm not the one who fails to make that distinction. The DSA, the left, is the one failing to make that distinction.
I just made that distinction. You might not have heard it over the bluster, but I made that distinction. And the fundamental issue is that, of course, Palestine has the right to resist, and people have to work through what that looks like. It includes violent resistance. International law allows violent resistance.
I don't think violent resistance will help liberate Palestine. It's a bad idea, and they shouldn't do it.
Golly, Robbie, so much of what you want to hear is always in the second half of my statement, but you cut it off before I can say it.
Your statements go on a long way sometimes.
Okay, well, I'm sorry that I'm trying to inject a nuance in a situation where you want to just sit here and echo what the mainstream media has to say about how terrorism is wrong. We all agree terrorism is wrong, and killing civilians is wrong. I happen to want to...
I apologize for echoing the mainstream consensus that terrorism is bad.
No.
I'm sure our viewers will be appalled by that statement.
No, it's very brave and big of you to do that. The courageous thing to do right now is to call out
You do, in fact, make it seem difficult.
Our state-funded abuses of the Palestinian people. And while you say, I agree with that, every time I bring it up, you never bring it up. I bring it up and you say, oh, yeah, I agree. But that doesn't sound like advocacy to me.
That's not fair whatsoever. I absolutely advocate it's non-intervention and peace on both fronts, on all fronts, as our Libertarian Party guest was saying. That's why I'm a member of that party. Doesn't matter what your personal views are of it. We should not have violence between countries. We should not endorse and fund it. We're united on that. And no one should enact violence against someone else, and then you shouldn't engage in retaliatory violence against other people for the violence that was perpetrated against you. I don't know why that's controversial.
It's not controversial. What's controversial is why nobody wants to talk about what 2.3 million people sitting in open-air prison for 17 years are supposed to do about that situation.
All right, more rising right after this.
No solutions? No thoughts?
What? What do you mean?
I'm just asking.
I'm not an expert in the region. I support what the two-state solution. You said a two-state solution isn't what they actually want.
It's not.
Whatever
it's not,
equal
because
participation.
Of the Israeli regime of settler colonialism and expanding the settlements. There's like a cheesecloth network of what Palestine is even left, and it's not sustainable. It's not. There's no state
we can have
to draw a line around.
We can have on whatever guest you want who is an expert on what would be best for the Palestinian people or is in touch with what the desire of the Palestinian people is for land and equal political treatment. And I will likely endorse whatever that.
I can tell you, the fundamental issue is that Israel has said it has, as a matter of state policy, needing to do population control because they recognize that if they want to maintain an Israeli state with a two-tiered hierarchical system of representation within their state where your rights accrue along with your religious identity, that you cannot allow there to be a large population of Arabs and Muslims within your own country.
So
which means they have to do literal population control, which is why they have 2.3 million Arabs locked up in an open air prison. To have any kind of democracy,
you're describing the problem to me, and I endorse the problem. What are you saying is the solution?
Well, I'm going to describe the problem because the problem never gets described.
Well, you just attacked me for not being able to articulate a solution.
If I got to do it on your timeline, Robbie, do you want to also give me the words that you want me to say, or do you want me to make the case?
Yeah, I'm nervous on the surface, I look fine. My brain feels heavy, my traumatized mind, and I'm so tired I can't feel my eyes. Whoa. Whoa, I'm petty, but I know how to lie. I feel feelings that I can't describe. I'm not breathing, but I'm still alive. Whoa, whoa.
Shout out to Neoliberal Tears for this.
Shout out to Twitter/X user Neoliberal Tears for resurfacing this clip.
Neoliberal Tears commented at the top of the show, "What happened to my music?" One of my favorite commenters. Yeah, so much affection for me.
Prepare for a holiday season of neoliberal tears.
Let us be clear that the entire land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, before and after Zionists colonized it in 1948, is called Palestine. If you're a true ally, you support a one-state solution, also known as full Palestinian sovereignty. Keep rocking Palestine map necklaces and other art.
You see the map of Palestinian territory shrinking as those decades pass, to understanding the hollowness of the calls by someone like Biden, who I saw put out a tweet saying that we have to move towards a two-state solution. Can you talk a bit about how that's essentially such an unserious request at this point because of how much territory has been taken? In my opinion, the only real solution to ending the cycle of violence is a multiracial, multi-ethnic democracy where Palestinians are given full rights. I'm curious about your assessment of that path forward.
Yeah, first of all, Emma, I agree with you. I think that's the only way forward. Not only because of the impracticality, and I will talk about it in a minute, of the two-state solution now with the new established facts on the ground, but also as a principle, as the best way forward for a country that has millions of a third generation of settlers, if you want, and millions of the indigenous people, many of them still millions refugees outside the country. The only way of reconciling these two communities is through a multiracial, multi-ethnic, democratic state that would be a win-win. It would be a win-win formula for everyone concerned. Now, more concretely, I agree. I mean, because the settler colonial movement has these two dimensions, geography and demography, or space and population, Israel always had this dilemma. It wanted more space, but with more space came more Palestinians. So what they decided in 1967, and I wrote about it in my book, The Biggest Prison on Earth, what they decided in 1967 is not to expel massively the Palestinians as they did in 1948, but to create this matrix of power that enclaves the Palestinians in such a way and does not allow them to expand, that actually you don't have demographically to calculate them in your democracy. So millions of Palestinians in Gaza and in the West Bank could not vote, could not be elected, could not take part in their future. Israel called that solution a two-state solution. Even the most feeble Palestinian leader like Abu Mazen could not accept it. And now, for all practical intents and purposes, 60% of the West Bank is already annexed to Israel in one way or another. To create in this bisected remaining 40% of the West Bank a Palestinian state that would signify an international recognition of the rights of the Palestinians for self-determination is a joke. Is a joke at best. And anyway, I don't think the Israelis would allow either a one-state or a two-state. So I don't think that's the big question. And America would not force Israel to have the two states. It would allow Israel to continue with the status quo. They may talk the talk, but they won't walk the walk, so to speak. And therefore, we have one state now, but it's an apartheid state. It's an oppressive state. And it will have to be dynamics from within that will change the regime rather than create another state. But this needs, of course, an international support and solidarity, as happened in apartheid South Africa.
To anybody out there who is asking you, but what's the solution? You know, if anybody is looking for a 10-second pitch, it's the one-state solution. It's equal rights for all. It's been for decades. You know, when Edward Said wrote about it, Bibi was still in power because LOL democracy, right? Israel, that is. I mean, that leader has been there forever.
Yeah, but that's the thing, though, right? They describe, you know, the right, at least I don't mean to just do vague theys. The right wing Israeli government describes the full equal admission of Palestinians into a one state as a demographic threat.
And what they're doing is violent demographic engineering. So if we're talking about violent demographic engineering, we need to push back on that framing.
Look, I don't disagree with anything you're saying, but I don't know. I'm being like attacked for not having a solution to the problem. What is the solution to the problem?
I'm not attacking you for not having a solution. The problem is having a solution is very difficult, which is why I don't come to the situation that the Palestinians are in with the hubris of wagging my finger and saying, oh, no, you can't do anything. Just sit quiet and don't act. Fundamentally,
well, that is a fundamental difference.
Occupied people have the right to resist.
I have no trouble wagging my finger at violence, especially indiscriminate civilian targeting violence.
Many the feelings of the people on the left is like, one, the two-state solution is largely uncredible at this point because of the settlement expansion. But also, do we want to endorse an ethno-state in principle?
Yeah, I never know what that means, the two-state solution because of the settlement expansion. Get rid of the settlements. What is this? They can either stay in Palestine or they can leave.
Sure, I completely agree, but I don't know. I think the idea is that, like, for the last 20 years, Israel has demonstrated an unwillingness to force settlers to leave. Quite to the contrary, they've been funding and arming settlers to go and expand and stay. And so I think it's an acknowledgement of the Israeli position that they will not allow a two-state solution, which doesn't make it any more or less reasonable than a one-state solution, because they're also not going to allow that.
Either. If we base anything on what Israel is willing to do without being forced to do it by the United States, what will happen is the maintenance of occupation and apartheid, because that's what they want.
I completely agree. And I completely agree.
I think that a different model than just separation, which is, I think, much more utopian, to be honest with you, than finding a way to live in equality and coexistence is. I think separation is the utopian and quite unrealistic scheme, because they do in fact live together, and therefore I think equality ought to be the keynote of the future. Equality and self-determination for both people. There are two people in one land, which is very small, which cannot be realistically partitioned any more than you can build settlements with thousands of yards of electrical wire around them and expect people just to want to leave and go and pretend they're not there. So all I'm saying, using the model of the Andalusia and the Weimar that I talked about at the end, is can we not find more imaginative models for coexistence, given that these are two people who are tragically but not necessarily only tragedy, involved hopelessly with each other for now and for the future.
If they say that settlers can live in Ramallah because they like the hills of Ramallah, I would like to live in Jaffa because that's where my father lived, and it's a beautiful city. And it's also Palestinian. Jaffa was always the most important Palestinian city. I mean, before Israel was established, it was the commercial, industrial, and cultural center of Palestine.
Right.
So
but just
they want to live near Ramallah. I want to live in Jaffa. And the second option is that we have one democratic free state, and that state will not be Jewish only.
Right.
And that means we will have equal rights, which means I could run to be the prime minister of that state. So
right,
it's not like we become just Israelis. It becomes a completely different entity.
Right. Yeah. And probably the name would change. It wouldn't be able to stay Israel. Maybe it'd be Israel, Palestine. Maybe it'd be both. Maybe it would be, if there was one democratic nation with all people having a choice in that, right. It wouldn't be a Jewish nation only. It would be a nation, the Holy Land.
Exactly.
So it would definitely change. That is,
maybe we could call it the state of the Holy Land. I mean,
that's what I think they should do. That's exactly. I think it should just be called the Holy Land, and that's the name of the country, and people live there. And I mean, that is ultimately.
And imagine how many tourists will come to visit Jerusalem to see.
Everybody. Yeah,
three religions, not one. You see how God has been so generous with us. 3 religions, not one.
Yes.
Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
One of the peace plans that have been offered to the Palestinian people, peace plans, quote unquote, by the way, had a right of return. I mean, any Jewish person from anywhere in the world can come live in Israel/Palestine. Meanwhile, a woman who was born in Haifa and displaced in 1948 cannot return. Do you see how that's wrong?
The right of return can be only as something symbolic. They can get, they can get some something back, but you understand that Israel will never give millions of Palestinians come back live in.
Do you see how that's wrong? Do you see how that's wrong?
I see how you see it wrong, but they can have a better.
But if you were Palestinian, you would see it as wrong as I am. But why? Why do you not see it just as wrong? I mean, right of return for the Palestinian people that were displaced from their homes in 1948. Can they not go back to their homeland?
You mean also for their descendants and
yes,
their grandchildren?
Yes, of course. Of course.
It's millions of people. It will change the country.
Do it now before it becomes tens of millions. Right?
But it will change all the country. How can you think Israel could accept?
What would it change? What exactly? Why would it change? Can you tell me?
How it changed? Change all the society. Also, some of them don't have a peaceful aspiration.
So are Jewish people better? Are Jewish people better than Palestinians?
No, we are not better, my friend. But they.
Well, that's what it's sounding like.
The Palestinian could have the right of return as something symbolic to what becomes the state of Israel. They could have the right of return to historical Palestine.
Well, I think the whole point.
The West Bank and Gaza.
Well, the whole point of why people like you are maybe have don't want the Palestinian people to come back, the right of return, is because you want to keep them a minority. That is the unfortunate truth, because you want it to continue to be a Jewish state. Is that why?
In a way, yes. Many Jews.
Okay. Well, do you not see how that's a problem?
It's it's as I say, we cannot make justice for all. For the complete and total justice. There will be some compromise.
Well, complete and total justice for the Palestinian people and all the wrongdoings that have happened to them is the right of return. I think that's a big one. I think the right of return is a big one.
I know. I know how it's important to you in your narrative.
Not my narrative. I think that's the right thing to do. I think that should happen. That they were displaced from their homes in 1948.
They could have right to return to the future Palestinian state, and they could have something symbolic.
Well, no, to their homes that they were kicked out of in 1948. That not to a land that's called Palestine. I'm talking about to their homeland, But okay.
Some of those homes are not exist anymore.
But I don't want a two-state solution. I want a one state.
So that's what one state.
Listen. Forget about right of return for a second. I support a one-state solution, and that also will never happen because Israel cares about the demographics, right? I hope it does. I think it's more realistic than a two-state solution because of all the peace treaties and all peace deals, whatever. But listen,
what will be the symbols on the name of that future state?
It doesn't matter as long as we have. I don't care personally, as long as we have equal rights and we can live there in peace with no occupation, oppression, humiliation, and apartheid of the Palestinian people. Equal rights as citizens, equal votes. I think that's okay. I don't care what the name is, right? But Israel, on the other hand, they do care. They do care about the demographics. They want a Jewish majority, and if they give everyone in the West Bank and Gaza equal rights as citizens, then it threatens the idea of a Jewish state.
When you take Palestinians inside Israel, that's more than almost 1.5 million Palestinians, 1.4 million. The polls show that overwhelmingly and consistently they support a state of all its citizens, what they call a state of all its citizens, equal rights for everyone, and not a Jewish state that gives special and better rights to one group. So there you have a clear majority of Palestinians favoring that. And in the diaspora, I haven't seen any studies that I would rely on, but there we know that in the diaspora, by far, there is much stronger support for a one-state solution because of the right of return. A two-state solution would negate the right of return for refugees, whereas a one-state solution is consistent with it. Among Israeli Jews, the support is terribly low. And that's not at all surprising because the proposition is that to Israeli Jews, is you will give up your monopoly on military, economic and political power and share it with those whom you have denied it for many, many years. And there are very few groups of people in history who have done that without a lot of struggle to get them to that point. Certainly in this country, demands for civil rights were not met with rose petals and candy and sweets as we were supposed to be greeted in Iraq. They were met with dogs and hoses and bombs. And governors on down said, no, we'll never end segregation, we'll never end Jim Crow. This would be the end of our way of life if we did that. So that was the same proposition. You'll give up your monopoly on military, economic, political power and you'll share it with those you've denied it. And we resisted it in this country pretty vigorously. It requires a struggle, and it requires Israelis to feel that there is a price for the status quo, as it required white South Africans. And that's what boycott, divestment and sanctions tries to do, to raise the price of the status quo. At the same time, what I'm trying to do and others is to put forward an alternative, to say there is a price to the status quo, but there's also a way out. And I think the time will come when Israelis are ready to look for that way out, but not until they feel that the status quo has reached its dead end, that is coming.